episode 4 of The Final Glass, where my husband Yakov and I discuss historical events with alcohol. So it's kind of like Crossfire. There's definitely some sparks. We don't agree everywhere. And we're married and we drink. And sometimes our cats, who also have very strong opinions about just about everything, make an appearance. And I just want to just briefly mention today is cold. And so true to form, our Siberian cat Yadviga has been super clingy. So even though she's the best equipped out of all of us to deal with the cold, I think she is the least able to deal with the cold. So
she believes only animals should wear fur.
Yes.
So the name of our show comes from the Oscar Wilde quote, who says, "After the first glass, you see things as you want them to be. After the second glass, you see things as they are not. And after the third glass, you see things as they truly are. And that is the most horrible thing of all."
Yeah, that final glass is quite a destroyer of worlds. And speaking of destroyer of worlds, that is what we will be talking about today. The second part of our series on nuclear testing. But before we get into that, for those who haven't watched before, maybe you could describe your getup.
So I like to wear stuff that's branded with our company logo, and I hate studio lights. I'm more comfortable behind the camera than in front of it. So the lights hurt my eyes. I had eye surgery, and now I wear sunglasses.
Yes, we had a whole weeks-long discussion about what it would take for you to discuss things with me.
Indeed.
In front of a camera.
Indeed.
In front of it. So we are going to start with our first drink before we get into the second part of nuclear testing, the history of nuclear testing. And I'll let you go first, as usual.
So I'm having Epicurean, which is a blend of Lowlands whiskeys. And it is the kind of scotch that is my favorite type of scotch, which is basically tastes like bourbon. It's light, it's fruity, there's a little hint of spice, and it's sweet.
Can I smell it? I actually like this one. I like to smell whiskey more than I like to taste it. So please don't come at me about that. So because it is so cold, I'm back to basics, and we're doing yet another flavor of Bailey's in my coffee. I haven't tried this one before. This is tiramisu. But the problem is that the last one I tried, which was toffee flavored popcorn, was depleted more rapidly than uranium in a nuclear weapons test. Like it went really quick. And we'll see if this one also gives me the urge to watch Hallmark Christmas specials.
Terrible.
Yes, the last one ended up with you having to sit through Hot Frosty.
Yes.
So, all right.
I don't know how that got greenlit.
Cheers. Okay, yeah. This is just as good. And there was a movie called Mistletoe Farms that I was... We might be watching that soon.
You're ruining my scotch experience.
How's your scotch?
It's excellent. Light, fruity, smooth, like a blend is. It's funny they call it a blend of single malts, but that's what a blend is. So anyway.
Okay, so last time we talked about the nuclear testing that brought the US first and then the Soviet Union into the whole nuclear weapons club. Now we're going to talk about the rest of the states. And right now, I believe there are 8 nations that are nuclear weapons capable. Let's make sure my numbers are correct.
And in rough order, it's
US,
the US,
USSR,
UK,
China,
France.
Oh, France was before China.
France is before China.
Wait, hold on. US, USSR, UK, France, China,
India,
Pakistan,
and then
North Korea,
and then
not admitted, but
yes,
pretty understood to have nuclear weapons
sneaking in 1967 would be Israel,
And then there's one state that had two states that had nuclear weapons and gave them up, but one that gave them up by dismantling them.
Yeah,
And
so
that was South Africa.
by dismantling the program, correct. But
Right.
there are actually a lot of states that gave up nuclear weapons when they had them with the Budapest Memorandum, one of which was Ukraine,
Yes.
which is in the news all the time now, Kazakhstan, the Baltics, Moldova, some of the other stans,
Belarus.
all of those had nuclear weapons, and with the exception of Belarus, which might have them again.
We don't know.
We don't know. But those states gave up nuclear weapons. So when the
Yeah.
Soviet Union dissolved, quite a few states did give up nukes in exchange for security guarantees.
Well, they weren't guarantees. And
Yeah.
we need to point that out because the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, it was not a treaty. There was nothing legally binding about it. That was just trust.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be misplaced trust, in my opinion, which nobody cares about. But in my opinion, it was misplaced trust.
Yeah, there have been a lot of wars which did not involve nuclear weapons because of the Budapest Memorandum, which is good for the world, but maybe not so good for the participants.
Right. So that is where we are in the current state of who has nukes. So how did we get to this point? Okay, we talked about how the US got to this point. We talked about how the Soviet Union got to this point. The next state to get to this point was the UK. The UK. And that is actually, to me, maybe the most interesting nuclear development in this whole saga, because the UK actually was a part of the Manhattan Project. They had their own nuclear development program called alloy tubes, which is great because they were like, what's the most boring thing we can think of? Let's name it that, because then people will look at it and go, oh God, I don't want to, who cares about alloy tubes? That was their nuke program. Well, that merged into the Manhattan Project.
Mm-hmm.
They were a part of that. So Winston Churchill knew everything that was going on with that testing. And then in 1946, the US passed what was called the McMahon Act, which basically said it doesn't matter how much of an ally you are, we are not sharing any of our nuclear information with you. You don't get any. UK, you're cut off. And there was a reason for that.
Yeah, a portion of this is because, yes, Churchill knew about all the nuclear developments, but so did Stalin. And so the British portion of the U.S. nuclear development program was rife with communist spies.
Okay, but so was the U.S. portion.
So was the U.S. portion, but the difference is how we dealt with this. In the U.S., we tended to execute our spies.
Well, we executed 2 of them. Yeah. There were a bunch that, because remember, what was his name? The State Department guy.
Adel.
No. Who? No. The State Department guy whose name, Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss was not, and he like had a bare minimum that he had to serve, and it was over lying in court. It was over perjury. It wasn't even over the fact that he was a Russian agent. Yeah. Soviet agent.
But the Brits treated their spies very differently. They tend to let them go. They tend to let them stay in place.
Yeah, because Kim Philby, he was one of us. He was.
Yeah, they tended to be people who were upper crust.
Quite disgusting.
And so the U.S. didn't take kindly to that. So that's why the McMahon Act, that's part of the reason that the act was passed.
Right. And so at that time, the Brits knew, hey, we need to have our own programs separate from the U.S. We need to protect ourselves. They did research and realized that it would just take 10 nuclear bombs to absolutely reduce the UK to rubble, to radioactive rubble. And they knew they couldn't survive that. So they had to have their own deterrence and own defense. Even though later on, the relationship, especially after Sputnik was launched in 1957, was it 57 or 59?
I think it's 57.
57. After Sputnik was launched, the US was like, oh, hey, yeah, we do need friends. They still, and I think rightly so, felt they needed to have their own way to protect themselves. And probably the only time in history this has happened, all of the UK's political parties agreed on this.
Yeah. So the UK's program,
the High Explosives Project.
The High Explosives Project was indeed ended up being a success.
It did. But it was interesting how it came about. So first, they did actually go online. Their first reactor reached criticality in 1947. which seemed like it was on track. But then 1949, the Brits were absolutely embarrassed that the Sovs managed to have their nuclear weapon first. That was hugely embarrassing for them. So what the UK did after that, which I really, this is one of the things I think is funniest about it, is they basically announced every step of the program that they were doing. So in 1948, they were like, we're going to have a nuclear program. That was announced. And then they went on doing it. Then in 1952, they announced, Winston Churchill himself got up and announced, hey, we're going to test a nuclear weapon this year. And they did. It had a really interesting name, and the name makes absolutely no sense to me. And if somebody knows, I would love if you could email it or maybe link it or send it in our Instagram messages, because I cannot figure out why the British would name their first nuclear weapon the Blue Danube.
The Blue Danube, which
Yeah.
the Danube is not in the UK.
No,
Strauss
and
was not British.
Strauss was not British.
In fact, the Danube isn't even blue, it's brown.
Yeah, there's so much about this I just don't understand, that if somebody can explain it, that would really help my base of knowledge. So in any case, they exploded it off the coast of Australia. It went well. It did. The radioactivity did kind of disperse in a way that they didn't expect, because the weather patterns changed. But it all went really well until 4 weeks later, when the US exploded their first thermonuclear weapon. And it turns out the British were actually still behind in weapons development.
Yeah.
So that continued to be a struggle. And it is worth mentioning here that the Brits even were still working with the US.
Mm-hmm.
They did host American weapons, right, on their soil. They did have, it was not a complete cutoff, but there was definitely a rift for a bit. Mm-hmm. Whether you come down on this whatever side, there was a rift. So then, not even hot on the heels, it took about a decade.
The French.
And it's funny how everybody says that. They always, the French. And it was they actually tested it in the Algerian desert, and it was the blue gerbil. Jerboa, right? Which I think is gerbil. Yeah. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's a different, anyway. No, it's a jerboa. Anyway, it was named after an animal, and it was named Blue. And it was in the Algerian desert. And the French method of coming to this bomb was very interesting as well, because up until about 1954, they had no program to speak of, and nobody was including them.
Yeah, they saw themselves as a great power, but the rest of the world realized that life had passed them by.
Well, I also think that there was some element of Charles de Gaulle just being really irritating to both the Americans and the British. I'm not sure how common this knowledge is. There was actually a post-World War II fight between the British and the French in the Middle East, because the French were just driving everybody up the wall. So this has been an ongoing issue. Mm-hmm. And so they weren't included in the nuclear plans. In 1954, they decided we should get on this. In 1956, something happened that made them say, yeah, we should get on this right now.
Yeah, the Suez Crisis. And in the Suez Crisis, the U.S. sided against the Brits and the French.
Well, I think that it's worth having the discussion. The Suez Crisis didn't happen alone. This was the twin crises. Mm-hmm. It was happening at the same time as the Hungarian Revolution. And so everybody was allied with everybody or against everybody, depending upon which crisis you were talking about, right? So both the US and the Soviet Union were telling the Brits and the French and the Israelis in the Suez, what the hell are you doing? And pushing. On the other hand, the French, British, and US were telling the USSR, what the hell are you doing, about what they were doing in Hungary. So I think that was as weird a time maybe as it is right now.
Yeah.
Politically, it's very hard to make sense of anything going on then.
And the other important piece of the French nuclear program was it was assisted by the Israelis.
Yes, it was assisted by the Israelis. There were several Israeli scientists, because remember that Israel after World War II, and so as a nation, in the UN, and so these scientists that were working on the Manhattan Project, a lot of them were refugees. A lot of them were Jewish refugees. And then afterwards went to Israel. So the French may not have had their own ingrown ability to do this, but by working with Israel, they brought in people who had already worked on a program. And it's interesting that the French didn't have as many of their own native people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because of course, a
lot of them were dead, a lot of them were collaborators, a lot of them
But this whole nuclear thing really started
with Marie Curie, yeah.
With the Curies.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the French really had a lot of catch up to do.
Yeah.
And they did. They did catch up. They did their first several tests in Algeria. After that, they began doing their tests in Polynesia.
In Pacific, yes.
Yeah, in Polynesia. And they had their last test in 1996. And the 90s, with one exception, was really when everybody kind of stopped. I'm going to say paused now. Paused their nuclear testing, their physical nuclear testing.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think from there, maybe we can do our second drink and see things as they are not.
We can.
Okay, so when was it? Thinking. 1964, right?
Yeah.
1964. 1964, China tested its nuclear weapon. And at Lernop, I think, I'm not good with Chinese pronunciation.
Yeah, Lop Nor.
Lop Nor. Aha, had it backwards. So at Lop Nor, they tested their, and everybody knew it was coming. This was no surprise. They knew it was coming for years.
So this is another one of these strange crises that happened, because this program was started early in 1956, but it really came to a head during the Sino-Soviet, we're going to say conflict, but it was essentially a miniature war. Break?
Sino-Soviet break?
Sino-Soviet break, but it was actually a miniature war that was fought on the borders with a lot of casualties.
Well, it ended up in a war. For a long time, it wasn't. So, but we'll get to the war.
Mm-hmm.
So the Chinese nuclear bomb program was triggered by Taiwan Straits crisis.
The
first one.
Yeah.
There were multiple.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people in the West kind of miss how much was going on in Asia. Everybody gets so focused on Russia and Europe that we certainly forget Africa, but kind of Asia gets swept away too.
Yeah.
But the Taiwan Straits crises, because there was more than one, there were a couple that were very close to nuclear war.
Yeah. And the Chinese understood, despite Mao's assertion that nuclear weapons are a paper tiger, his first assertion. The Chinese very well understood that they need nuclear weapons to avoid their perception of being bullied by the West and their perception of being bullied by the Taiwanese, the Chinese in Taiwan, I should say. And so they began their program with the help, of course, of the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
Well, during the war...
1959, they began their break.
During the break, the Soviets actually threatened to nuke China.
Well, in 1969, but this was after China had the bomb.
Yes.
So they broke in the beginning. China did not have the bomb yet. And the U.S. was like, China can't get the bomb.
Yeah.
Whatever. And then 1964, China was like, got the bomb.
Yeah.
Here you go. And by the way, we only have this bomb because of American imperialism. So this is your fault. That was my favorite.
Yeah.
They were totally pointing the finger. This is your fault, America, specifically.
This is it's a paper tiger, and yet we need it because of your imperialism.
Yeah, because of you. We don't want to be bullied, and so we're going to have this. And there is some validity in that argument, but let's not give more validity.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the problems we have when people go back over historical events. They say, "Oh, well, this is valid," and then that validates every single thing that is done. No, it doesn't. It never does.
Yeah.
It never does. So, I mean, be honest about it. But in any case, they had the bomb, they exploded it, and on the heels of that came
the 69.
Yes, the 69 Sino-Soviet undeclared war.
Yeah, the Battle of
border conflict.
Zhengbao Island was when the Soviets threatened to nuke the Chinese. The U.S. said, no, you're not going to, because then we'll retaliate.
Yeah, and I thought that was a fantastic thing to bring up about this, was that, the U.S. and the USSR are diametrically opposed. We get that. But the U.S. and China are not exactly buddies either.
And in the mid-'60s, the Chinese troops were killing Americans
in Vietnam.
So this is during a time of tremendous friction between both the U.S., the Soviet Union, and Communist China at the same time.
Yeah, and the U.S. came down on the side of just Communist China. So this just goes to show how absolutely convoluted international relations are, which we'll see even more when we discuss some of these other nuclear tests that were done, but how absolutely convoluted history is. It's not a straight line. You can't look at it that way. You can't if this, then that. Because if this, the U.S. and Communist China are enemies, then that, the U.S. shouldn't have been saying, hey,
don't nuke.
USSR, don't nuke them.
Don't nuke them. And the
but
U.S.,
that's what happened.
During the Korean War, MacArthur was stopped from nuking China as well.
Yeah.
And so these threats were coming fast and furious.
Yeah, and it really is the head of a pin. It's like one of my favorite movie scenes is that scene in Men in Black where Tommy Lee Jones says there's always an alien plague or an invasion getting ready to happen, and the only reason the world keeps turning is because they don't know about it. Yes, but it doesn't even take alien plagues and alien invasions. It's just that's the same with international politics as well.
Yeah.
And then when you go back and you think, I didn't hear about this when I was studying whatever, and thank God nobody really clocked that it was happening when it did, it's a mess. So we should move on.
Yeah.
Well, before we move on to the next nuclear test, I think we should discuss that. Around 1968, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed, came into effect in 1970. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't that many nations. I mean, it was, I think, 60 nations that signed it at first, and then more signed on. There are a whole bunch of them that are signed on now, just a very few who haven't. But this basically said, hey, if you have nuclear weapons, you cannot give nuclear weapons or the nuclear weapon technology to anybody who doesn't. And if you don't have nuclear weapons, you're not going to develop nuclear weapons. You are going to only use nuclear stuff for peaceful purposes.
But the main element, I think, of that was that the West or the nuclear countries were supposed to give the countries who signed the Non-Proliferation Pact peaceful nuclear technology.
Well, but we had been doing that for a while because there was Eisenhower's whole Atoms for Peace program, but which actually gave some stuff to Iran in the 1950s. So it was, I think, basically an internationalization of what had already been going on.
Yeah, but it was also immediately abused. And the lies started even before the ink on the treaty was dry.
And I two more things I think we should point out. So number one, China getting the nuclear bomb was, I think, the major reason that the seat on the Security Council went from Taiwan to mainland China.
Yeah.
So mainland China now had the seat on the Security Council. So the only people in 1968, 1970 that had the bomb, known to have the bomb, we should make that clear, were people that were on the UN Security Council.
Mhm.
And I think that's very important. In fact, it was actually a tenet of the third world nations, which was not pejorative at that time. At that time, it was like a source of pride. It meant that you weren't aligned with East or West, as Kwame Nkrumah said, we face forward. Um, it was a basic tenet of the non-aligned nations to oppose nuclear development. But just because they said they opposed it didn't mean that they weren't trying to develop some of their own.
And it was very much a case in the next, we'll discuss India, but it was very much a case of non-proliferation for you, but proliferation for me.
Right. And there was an idea amongst a lot of these nations, and I can definitely commiserate with, I can see how you get this idea, which is they basically called it nuclear apartheid, right? You're allowed to have these weapons, but we're not. So on the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, there are several nations that just refused to sign. And one of them was India, another was Pakistan, Israel didn't sign. And the India Pakistan issue was interesting because Jawaharlal Nehru, was actually one of the biggest advocates of nuclear non-proliferation during his lifetime. And then in 1968, previously they had border wars with China, they had issues with Pakistan. So in 1968, India was like, we need to go forward with this. So they didn't sign the treaty, but they didn't really say anything to anybody. So they were still receiving things from the US and from Canada under the Atoms for Peace program.
And they were staunch anti-proliferation for everyone else.
Yes. But it was interesting to me also, this program actually was signed and okayed in 1968. In 1971, of course, India and Pakistan had a war. And the US chugged some naval assets into the Bay of Bengal to kind of threaten India. The USSR chugged their own naval assets in to tell the US not to threaten other people. And India used this to say this was their excuse that they needed to have nuclear weapons. Oh, this is when we date it from. It was before. They started before that.
Yeah.
And that needs to be clear. I mean, just don't make it. Why make an excuse? You think you need it. You think you feel threatened, and there's definitely danger going on in the world. So, don't make an excuse. That's my issue.
But the excuse was definitely in order to prevent other people from getting it.
Possibly. So India detonated their nuclear weapon in 1974, right?
Yeah.
Right after I was born. That was my parents' gift for having a child was that India had the bomb, and it was Operation Smiling Buddha.
And with this, the monopoly of the Permanent Security Council members
Yes.
having nuclear weapons was broken.
Yeah, and it kind of shocked people. They were like, oh my gosh, how did India do that? So they immediately started strengthening controls and trying to keep things from getting out. But the reality, I think, of this situation is that if you have uranium, you can mine your own uranium, right? If you have scientists, you have access to how these kind of reactions happen.
And by this time, a number of PhD programs were training people in nuclear energy.
Yeah.
Which also
the cat was out of the bag.
Yeah, it's the background for nuclear weapons. And so there's a joke that several college students had used nuclear weapons as their PhD programs.
So, I mean, the cat was out of the bag, and we're trying, the world is trying, all of these programs are there to keep nuclear weapons from proliferating throughout the world. But what are you going to do, right? You can do things, but those things are frowned upon by the general UN establishment.
Yeah.
Who also frowns upon this nuclear proliferation, but you got to make a choice at some point. Which one are you going with as an institution? So India's bomb went off. At this time, Pakistan already had a nuclear program in the works.
Yeah. But what's notable is the proliferation after the US program and after the USSR program, which is built on the US program, proliferation comes faster and faster. So the Indian program took about 20 years.
But there's a mathematical rule for that.
Yeah. And so the so the Indian program took 20 years through testing. The Pakistan program took 11 years through testing. The time was cut almost in half.
Well, I think that there's something to be said for the help that Pakistan had, which is another thing to talk about, the vagaries of international politics, right? So first, the program was funded by Libya.
Yes.
And this was under Benazir Bhutto's father.
Yes.
So, but then, he was hanged, and Mohammed Zia al-Haq, came to power, and Zia continued the development of the program, but he kicked the Libyans out. He didn't really trust Gaddafi, which is an interesting factoid, I think.
Yeah, but in the end, Gaddafi couldn't be trusted, so he was right.
He was right, but I think a lot of people couldn't be trusted. Right up there, Alger Hiss, and he was American. So, yeah. So the Libyans were kicked out, but they still needed help in Pakistan. So they were helped by the Chinese. But that's still kind of murky.
Yeah.
How much help went on, and how much was this kind of help, and how much was that kind of help. What really helped Pakistan at that time was the 1979 Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, because all of a sudden the U.S. needed Pakistan's help.
Yeah.
And
to defeat the great Soviet Empire.
Right.
And so a lot of the violations that the Pakistanis were the Pakistanis were doing of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and some of these things that were a little bit more public, were swept under the rug.
Right. The U.S. kind of turned a blind eye, and the U.S. was the major enforcer, right? The major hall monitor of a lot of these things.
Yeah.
Pakistan was able to develop their nuclear weapon. Now, they didn't actually test a nuclear bomb until 1998, after India's second test.
Yeah.
So, but they did do cold tests in 1984. And from 1984, they had bombs from 1984. They just hadn't tested the actual bomb. And I think if we're talking about this, we need to talk a little bit about what's it called? Turnkey nuclear powers?
Turnkey nuclear power, yeah.
Turnkey nuclear power. So we have at least one of those, possibly two.
Mm-hmm. So the idea of the turnkey was that it was somebody who would have nuclear power but wouldn't necessarily have the capability to build it themselves. So it was someone who
could have a bomb in short order.
And have a bomb in short order, yes. So there are a large number of turnkey nuclear powers now. Even speaking 20 years ago, both South Korea and Japan were turnkey nuclear powers.
Yes.
Where they had nuclear power, they had nuclear power. They wouldn't have nuclear weapons.
Wouldn't take too much to get them.
In theory, but yes, but it wouldn't take too much to get
them.
And
I think this is an important point to bring up about Japan, because Japan has had there's actually been a discussion recently about Japan and nuclear weapons. And so I think it behooves us to remember it wouldn't be very hard for them if they wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So
they are truly, as Mao described nuclear weapons as a paper tiger, the Japanese actually believe it for now.
I don't know that they actually believe it. I think it's very easy to believe that when you can have one tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like you have enough money to buy a BMW and you tell everybody you don't need a BMW, but you actually have enough money to buy one if you want one.
And you've been to the dealership.
Right. You've been to the dealership. You know which BMW you would have if you wanted to buy one.
Yeah.
You just haven't. Maybe someday you will. But we're not going to talk about that someday. So that leaves us two more things. So it leaves us with...
That leaves us with the Vela incident on...
Is it Vela? I've been saying Vila. I think I read too much Harry Potter.
Yes. So the Vela incident of 22 September of 1979, where someone set off a nuke.
Someone somewhere,
Someone somewhere
possibly
set off a nuke.
set off a nuke. It might have been meteorites.
Yes.
It wasn't meteorites.
It wasn't meteorites. It was a nuke. It was between Antarctica and South Africa. So suspicion immediately fell on South Africa.
Your mileage might vary, but it was probably.
So the Vela was a satellite constellation that picked up this activity. And it was later confirmed by, oddly enough, sheep in Australia.
Yeah, they did thyroid tests on slaughtered sheep in Australia.
But before that, it was US sensors.
Yeah. And the thing is this test, and I'm going to go ahead and call it a test. They still publicly argue about what it actually was. I firmly believe it was a nuclear test, so I'm going to say it was. Just keep in mind, officially, they don't know what it was. But so this test was probably South Africa in conjunction with Israel. South Africa, according to a later person who reported on it, didn't have enough fissile material to run their own test at that time, but Israel did. And the test was only sensed because the weather changed just at the moment of detonation, which is one of those hand of God things.
And it's interesting. So now we think that South Africa didn't have the fissile material. However, now one of the big producers of uranium is Namibia, which at the time was under, maybe not direct control, but definitely was under control of the South African government.
Yes. Yeah. They were able to get what they needed from Namibia when they needed it.
Yeah.
And so no one has ever claimed responsibility for this. There's a lot of argument back and forth about who or what was responsible. And when I say a lot of argument, it's mostly in one direction. Mm-hmm. But there are some people who say, no, it was meteors.
Yeah.
Probably no, though. Probably that was a joint nuclear test that has not been claimed.
Yeah. But in the end, South Africa gave up their nuclear weapons at the fall of apartheid in
1989.
In 1989, and Israel has
still not
publicly admitted that they have nuclear weapons, but have discussed nuclear strikes.
Yes. Theoretical strikes.
Right.
Like theoretically punching someone in the face.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this leaves us with one last first nuclear test, and we actually can't discuss this one because it is outside the limits of the time that we will discuss things. So we absolutely will not discuss anything within the last 20 years. We may bring it up to draw a line, but we're not discussing it. And so North Korea had their first nuclear test in 2006, 19 years ago. Yeah. We're not discussing that. What we can discuss, however, is what happened in 1993.
Yeah, which is the North Korean withdrawal from the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Right. So they basically announced, hey, we want to make bombs.
Yeah.
And we're going to. And of course, South Korea was not happy.
Yeah.
As they had every right to not be. And so that's where we stop with discussing tests. We're not going to discuss the North Korea test at all. However, it's in the news constantly. So it's very easy to find any information that you want to look for on that.
Yeah.
So that being said, it's time to see things as they really are. I'm getting pretty like drinking Bailey's straight out of the bottle here. Which Hot Frosty is a much better movie if you do that. And just drink the Bailey straight out of the bottle. It becomes Oscar worthy.
I would argue 90% of movies are improved with scotch.
Well, Bailey's, because it's cold. Okay, final thought. You want to finish yours first?
Yeah, you can do your final thought while I finish.
Oh, I get to do the final thought first this time. That's insane. My final thought is somewhere along the same lines as this final thought I had last time. You can't trust anybody. Everybody is lying when it comes to nuclear stuff. Everybody's lying. Yugoslavia signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it turns out that they had a whole stockload of uranium, and that was not even turned over to someone else until, I think it was 2012. It was in the last 15 years or so, and Serbia kept it, and they gave it to Russia. India said that they wanted nobody to have nukes. They were working on nukes. I don't think Pakistan said anything about not having nukes. I think they were pretty open about wanting nukes. This was Sweden had a nuclear program. Switzerland had a nuclear program. Everybody had a nuclear program, and I can see why everybody would want to have a nuclear program. You don't want to be the one state that has no nukes when everybody else has their nukes pointed at you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think all of this rhetoric, oh, do you not trust me? Just be honest. No, I don't trust you because everybody has lied. So if we start from that point, then we can deal with each other much more honestly. Just assume everybody is lying.
And I think my final thought is that once a technology is brought out of the bag, nuclear weapons, AI weapons, drones, whatever, the machine gun, the spear, K-pop, any of those weapons, once they are deployed, the country that deployed them loses control of them. And often they end up getting used against them. So it hasn't happened with nuclear weapons yet, luckily, but it's something that we have to consider as we roll forward. But on the other hand, if we don't develop some of these weapons, then other people will, and then we risk being behind. So we are in a great conundrum, as the weapons that we develop may be the very weapons that end up ending the world.
And that is the very depressing note on which we will end this final class.
Yes.
What to do